Hello, this is Asian Movie Pulse Talks number 11. I am Panos Kotzathanasis and I'm here with Zaveri and Rouven Linnarz. And today we're gonna speak about a Korean film, one of the films that kickstarted the golden age of Korean cinema, that is JSA by Park Chan-wook, a film that was released in 2000. In case you did not know that, Korean cinema did not start in 2004 with Old Boy. There were some films before that, and JSA is definitely one of them. Rhythm, what do you think about the first films that started the golden age of Korean cinema?
Yeah, I think it all really for the Western audience in terms of Korean cinema started with the film Shiri, which was a massive hit, not only in Korea but when it came to the West, people were really amazed with what it had to offer in terms of its cinematic qualities and the stories that it had to tell, and so that was really the one that kickstarted for Korean cinema in the West. And then we had so many different films coming out, films like My Sassy Girl and Taegukki, and many such films which were from the late 90s, early 2000s. That's when the Korean New Wave, as they call it now, started, and JSA was one of those first films to break out from the South Korea and come into the West.
Yeah, and I will say the very interesting aspect about it is that this is a new wave that started with blockbusters, which is not usually the case with new waves, which is usually independent production. But this time in Korean cinema, we had this mainstream surge of films with huge budgets and the whole thing of a blockbuster. Rouven, what did you think about those first films of the new age of Korean cinema?
Yeah, I gotta be the one who's a bit more mainstream, because for me the first or for many German people, because we have to dub everything, and when you dub everything, it takes a lot of time before it's released. And I think the first Korean release that everyone saw was, again, very mainstream, was Old Boy. I think it was the first Korean film that I actually saw in the cinema nearby. And after Old Boy, everything else was released. Shiri was released, JSA was released, and many other features of that time. And nowadays, if you go to a German film festival, when they take place, that is, there is no German film festival which doesn't have at least one South Korean blockbuster film. I think the last film fest that I saw had the blockbuster The Beast and Deliver Us from Evil, and those are synonymous for the genre cinema that comes from South Korea. And I think it kickstarted the career of many people. Most, I think, famously, Park Chan-wook was one of them, but I think most famously because he won the Oscars last year, Byung-hun, who also did his work in genre cinema, doing thrillers, doing monster movies, and so on and so forth. And I did a little research in a preview prior to this. To our talks, and I read somewhere that maybe Rhythm, because he's praised to be the expert in that regard. It had something to do with the rise in globalization and the global success of blockbusters, but also it also had to do with the role of screen quota. There was a restriction saying that you have to have a certain amount of domestic films within Korean cinema. Is that correct?
That is true. I think that is still true at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah, but starting, I think it was around I think it was around the time that Siri came out that the percentage of quota for American to Korean films was very relaxed after that point, and this gave the opportunity to a lot of directors to watch these films and, okay, let's say, I don't want to say adapt, but maybe inspired from the size of American blockbusters. And this could be one of the reasons that this surge of mainstream films came in the beginning of 2000s.
That's true. I do think that, you know, the American influence with these films breaking out of the country did play a big part of it. Because if you look at films like, you know, Shiri, even JSA and Teguki, they all had this massive budget and they were made in the style and, you know, that the Western audience was familiar with their Hollywood productions and stuff. And so I think South Korean industry also knew that they had something that was in the style of the Western cinema, and that they thought could possibly be well received if it came into the West. And so I think that could also have played a bigger part in these films actually coming out.
Mm-hmm. And also, it's worth mentioning that these films were like a huge box office hits in Korea. They topped the box office. All of those films, Siri, JSA, Friend, Silmido, Taeguki, with the last two being the first films in Korea to have more than 10 million tickets, if I remember correctly, which is also very impressive because usually in most of the countries, the Hollywood films are usually the ones that top the box office, maybe with the exception of India and a couple of other countries, but usually Hollywood is at the top.
That's true.
Okay, let us now go to the film itself. Rouven, you're going to tell us a bit about what JSA is about?
Yeah, well, I try my very best. A film that deals quite a lot with flashbacks, so I try to do this as concise and to the point as possible, as you know me by now. So the whole thing takes place in the joint security area, or the demilitarized zone, which is an area between North and South Korea, which is, if I'm not mistaken, controlled by neutral nations or nations that try to keep the peace between those two nations, if I'm not mistaken by that. And there is an incident has happened. Several North Korean and soldiers have been shot. South Korean soldiers or border patrols have been wounded, and a Major Sophie Eugene, if I say the name correctly, is who's a half South Korean, half Swiss. And she is sent there to lead the investigation, and she's quickly told by her by her superiors that they know who did it. They know who did the killing, who did the murder. They just wanted to find out how all this took place. And of course, because it involves North Korean and South Korean soldiers. It's quite a explosive situation, to say the least. So everyone wants to get this investigation done as quickly as possible. So she interrogates the soldiers that are wounded or who are the perpetrators. Sergeant Lee So-hyuk, if I pronounce his name correctly, played by Lee Byung-hun, who is a familiar face in South Korean cinema, as is Song Kang-ho, who is Sergeant Oh Kyung-pil from the North Korean Border Patrol. And she quickly finds out that the official version that let's say the confession that each of these soldiers have signed is not the whole truth. At least she has the feeling that it's not the whole truth, and she tries to probe a little further, because none of the men would want to talk to her. And when one of the South Korean soldiers commits suicide, she says, all right, there's got to be something more to it. And after this, the movie sort of breaks into the second half, where we get to know the background of the murder, and we actually get the story of these two men who, as forbidden as it may sound, have had a sort of companionship or friendship, enjoyed that for a couple of weeks now. And of course, now that this has happened, they are try their best to cover it up.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. So
I hope I did that justice.
well, it's difficult to talk about the film without revealing anything, and it's one of those films that we better not spoil too much, because it's one of
very hard to say anything about this film, you know, slightly in depth without spoiling, you know, important bits about it.
Okay, okay, we can go a bit into it because it's almost 20 years since it was released. Probably some people have seen it. Okay, so the whole thing with okay, we mentioned all those blockbusters, but we also have to say that all those blockbusters had something to do with either the relationship of North and South Korea, most of them at least, the war that happened between the two Koreas, and partially about the DMZ zone, which, in my opinion, the whole concept of this DMZ zone, I understand the seriousness of it, but it is a bit, I want to say, ridiculous, actually, because there is this area that there is actually a line that separates its two countries, and it's literally a line, like some centimeters of a straight line that splits the two countries. And there is just a small house-like structure where the meetings can happen between the two Koreas and usually an observer from the UN, which is one of the concepts of the film. Rhythm, what do you think about this thing of DMZ?
Yeah, I mean, it's really silly, but as somebody who lives in a country who, you know, who has problems with its neighbors, I do kind of understand where they're coming from, you know, but obviously with countries who are slightly hostile with each other, there's always going to be a little bit of tension at the borders, and particularly a place like South Korea and North Korea, where, you know, they've only recently, actually in the same year as India and say Pakistan separated, it's the same year that the two Koreas separated. So, you know, I do understand where they're coming from, but again, it's a very, we don't have any such joint security areas or anything. You know, so that whole concept is very unique and, like you said, slightly ridiculous as well. Like the houses that you mentioned between the two lines, even though they are exactly on the lines, half on this side and half on that side, they are considered neutral territory. That does not belong to either North or the South. And, you know, it's just that little bit of area in the, I think it's called the Panmunjom village or something, where this joint security area, after that, is just basically a border that's uninhabited. And, you know, it's just a wide stretch of land that's inaccessible to people. So yeah, this joint security area is both fascinating and a bit funny, to say the least.
Rouven?
I was thinking something similar when I watched the film in 2005 or something like this. I didn't really understand it, but in 2009, when I visited Berlin and saw what remains of the Berlin Wall, I sort of had this is still my image when I think of borders between two nations and between countries. And if you have, I won't go into detail because there's lots and lots of detail about how these borders and how the wall has worked and how strict it was. And then you have a film like this where you don't have a wall. I mean, we talk about, for example, the spitting scene in a moment, but it's not just a wall there. It's just a small stone that is laid into the ground, which marks the sort of line between these two countries. And the whole concept of the DMZ or demilitarized zone is very, very strange, because especially between two nations, or let's say two ideologies that are so far apart from each other. I'm not sure if this let's say buffer if I want to call it that, between those two ideologies actually not just incites the whole conflict?
Well, it's obvious that the whole concept of the DMZ and the JSA is the two countries don't trust each other even for a second. That's why they have gotten to such extreme measures, which is also they have this kind of mistrust that only comes from people who know each other very well, because the two Koreas was actually a nation until the Americans and the Russians essentially split the two countries. They were the same before, and one day other powers decided to split them in two. And actually, I feel that Park Chan-wook really plays with this thing, that they are separated, but how similar they are. You can see it with the flashback as the soldiers from each side begin to come together. Really?
Yeah, I agree. I think that's one of the key reasons that this film did so well with the Korean audience. Is how the people both sides of the borders have friends, relatives who separated years and years ago, and so they know that they are basically the same people, but it's the politics, it's the ideologies that these politics brings that separate the two people. But what Park Chan-wook does is he really puts all these really heavy-handed metaphors in the film. Like, when the two are playing, the two sets of players, they are, soldiers, they're playing games. He'll zoom into the hands that are, tied together and, strong together and stuff like that. So I think that's a really big part of the appeal of JSA for the Korean audience, and also for the Western audience as well, because with films like Shiri, they knew that the two countries are at war, but this puts them right at the border and shows the Western audience how dissimilar yet so very similar the two people are. And that's why I think what Park Chan-wook did with this film resonated so well, and the film went on to do such immense amount of business in its country.
Rouven?
Apart from what Rhythm just said, I think the human level, that even if we think of the whole body of work from Park Chan-wook, there is still a human level inside, even though when you think of, let's say, other works like Old Boy or Sympathy for Miss Vengeance, there is still a human level that you can understand where these characters are coming from. And this here, I mean, it's not as abstract. It's actually to some extent, or compared to the others that I just mentioned, somewhat more realistic. And you get the idea where these people are coming from. And there are many scenes where it's quite astounding when you see the face of ideology, when you see these people who are invested in this system of belief, in this political system, and then something happens, which can be, a chocolate cookie, which can be a person who needs help, who just tripped on a mine, or who is stuck, and they can relate to that, they can understand that. And suddenly it's not just, there's the enemy, let's just leave him there. It's suddenly, there's a man who's about my age or is about your age, let's help him. And I think that's what makes this so resonate well with audiences and turn this into something like a parable about camaraderie, and a strong read and a strong story about what ways political systems, ideology shape, influence people, and probably get in the way of camaraderie or friendship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think. Sorry, Rhythm, please.
Yeah, I think there's a lovely scene in the film that also highlights what Rouven just said, where Kim Tae-woo's character is taking a picture of Song Kang-ho, Lee Byung-hun, and Shin Ha-kyun's characters. And at the back, you can see the two Kims, the pictures of the two Kims, and he doesn't want those two in the frame of the photo. And so he tries to go as low with his camera as possible, bringing the three characters together. And the closer that the three get together, the two Kims at the back, they disappear. So, you know, it's basically Park Chan-wook just saying that, you know, take the politics out of this and, you know, we're all just brothers and, you know, the same people.
Yeah, exactly. Please, Rouven, please.
I think when we talk about, I mean, it's easy to get to talk about the drama between those soldiers, or let's say the war movie aspect of JSA. But I think what I personally like the most about JSA is the whole cop drama, the whole kind of investigation, which I find perhaps even more interesting, because the cop drama in history is also about machinations, how a state, how a system actually works, because it's about finding who did something, or finding how something has happened, finding the truth. And to get to this sort of truth, it's a complicated matter, to say the least, because you are because it's not just who done it, but it's also about who gets in the way of finding out who has done it, or how it took place, and who has an interest in hiding, or let's say changing the truth to some aspects. I like this. I like how he plays with the idea of genre, making it a war movie, a drama, or anti-war movie and drama, and a cop drama.
Essentially, I think that he says that these soldiers from North and South Korea, they could be friends because they are quite similar essentially, but due to the politics, they cannot be friends. And the message in the end, it is bleak that the politics are above people. You can see that throughout the film. They would be friends, but essentially they cannot be friends due to the situation. I think the whole movie points at that, but also because before we talked about a bit how ridiculous this whole thing is with the DMZ, I would like to go to the spitting scene, which for me is like one of the most memorable in Korean cinema in general, and really funny. We have like the two soldiers sitting across each other, Byung-hun and Kang-ho, and they are so close together that at some point they start to spit at each other. So I couldn't stop laughing at this scene, because also I felt that the actors, they were kind of laughing, but I felt that they were really laughing at the scene as they were playing it, that they couldn't stop laughing. Rouven?
Yeah, I had the feeling too that this laughter came quite naturally in that scene. I mean, for me personally, that scene, and also the scene where the North Korean soldier eats that chocolate cake or chocolate cookie, I think it was. Those were the scenes that really stood out for me, because it's for these. I mean, it's like wearing a mask. You have this private person who thinks this person, he's a friend to me. I know him because that's the person I showed pictures of my wife to, or this is the person I just nearly spat in the face just for the fun of it. Mm-hmm. But then there is the political or ideological side to it. This is my enemy. This is the symbolism of a system which I deeply, deeply despise. I mean, the whole thing with for example, a chocolate cookie, I think that's amazing when the South Korean soldier says, why don't you come to our side? You can have cookies. You can have these kind of cookies all day if you like them so much. And suddenly everything is gone. The whole fun, the whole relaxed atmosphere is gone. And he says something like, I wish our country would produce cookies like that. But at one point, but you know what? Don't ever do this again. Don't ever ask me that again, or this will end. And I like how he switches atmospheres from something that is humorous or funny or relaxed into something that is quite serious. And the spitting scene or the scene that I just mentioned are perfect examples for something that has become something of a trademark for Park Chan-wook.
Really?
The humor he finds in normal situations, like the spitting scene and the one that Rouven said where he spits out the choco pie into his hand. It's absolutely trademark Park Chan-wook, at least with his films since JSA and all the ones that came after it. It's the spitting scene in particularly had me in stitches the first time I saw it, and I definitely think it's also a natural laughter between the two actors, and I'm not sure if he wanted to spit on the Shin Ha-kyun's shoes or if it's just something that happened during shooting it, but it provided for a good comedic value nonetheless.
And now that you mentioned, Rouven, this thing with the biscuit, actually, the whole thing that North Korea does not have food, at least not Western food, has been a recurring joke in a number of those films. I don't know if any of you remember in Siri, there is the North Korean at some point yells something like, do you know what it feels like never to have tasted a hamburger? Which is, I think that the South kind of jokes with the fact that the Western kind of food never reached North Korea, at least at that point.
And not just the Western food, but also this particular biscuit that they talk about in JSA is something that I think South Korea is extremely proud of, because I have seen, it mentioned in TV dramas and stuff, wherever they are, there's any sort of interaction between North and South people, it's always this particular biscuit that's always a topic of discussion and fascination for the North Korean people. So, I think it's definitely something that they're very proud of, this particular biscuit.
Rouven, you want to say something?
Yeah, I have a question for you two, because there is a phrase that both of these soldiers mentioned, those from South Korea and from the North Korea, which is, I noted it down, our countries have a history of agony and disgrace. They mentioned it a couple of times, and when the North Korean soldiers said that, I was like, all right, that's the ideology talking. But then the South Korean soldiers says it, I think 10 minutes later, and that got me thinking about, do they at one point, do they actually believe in that idea? Where's that line between, the ideology or the system and the private person? Where do you draw that line between these people? Because I had quite, that's why I mentioned the scene with the biscuit. I was always kind of trying to figure out these people, just like the investigator is. Where do you start with the real person, and where do you draw the line and say that's the soldier of South Korea or that's the soldier of North Korea?
I'm not Rouven.
Yeah, I mean, I am not really sure about the ideology of it all. I haven't really dwelled on that myself before, but I do think that the whole Korean peninsula, before there were the North and the South, I think they still have this pain and hurt from the Japanese occupation, maybe, and having to be brought into line by the Americans and the Russians during the Korean War. That maybe plays a part on the psyche of these soldiers, that maybe tends, takes them to say these kind of sentences, where it's they have had to face agony and disgust, because we've all seen films about the Japanese occupation and the sort of treatment that they had at the hand of the Japanese soldiers. So I think maybe that plays a part in the character saying this particular statement.
Yeah, but I guess the concept of civil war is disgraceful as a concept, because it's friends fighting friends, like relatives fighting relatives. I guess there is a disgrace in that, but even more for the Koreans, because they were instigated into it by the Russians and the Americans. They were not something that they started it. And And it's a bit, I feel that there is a historic sense of disgrace for them because Korea was always between, it was a country that was always occupied by someone. Either there were the Chinese that they wanted to invade Japan, or there were the Japanese that wanted to invade Korea. And they were always under these kind of circumstances. And the fact that in the end they split up is, I don't know, I think it's a disgrace for them. I think also the Joseon dynasty that they had, it was like one of the longest one in the world. It was up for more than 1,000 years. I don't remember exactly. And then the Americans and the Russians came and split them apart. So probably they still feel disgraceful for the whole thing and what happened during the Civil War, of course. Okay. So, Rouven, you want to say something?
No.
Okay, so to return back to the movie, okay, the way the narrative unfolds is mostly through flashbacks, which Park Chan-wook has always been like a master of flashbacks. Let's say he knows how to build the story based on what has not been said, and I think it's one of his highlights in this film. Although I felt that he perfected this aspect a bit later on. I found some issues here in the way the story unfolds, but okay, of course, it's the overall quality of the way he implements flashbacks is quite good. Rouven, what do you think?
I do agree. I think the middle part of this film is basically just the old flashback. So more than the other films that he's done, I think he spends the most time in the flashback in this one, although I'm not sure if that is statistically correct, but it just feels that way to me, and this is, I think, where he really picked up this habit of going into the flashback. And since he did it so well with this one, I think he carried on going further into the next, into his following scripts. And yeah, I think the flashback here is one of the highlights of the film, really, narratively, because obviously you have the mystery that's going on and the investigation that's going on in the two parts between the flashbacks, but it is this core flashback segment which really makes and breaks the film. It's not so much breaks, it's mostly makes the film for me, and I'm sure for a lot of people. Flashback is something that sometimes does tend to hold the film down if it's gone into too much, at least for me. But with this one, I don't think there was even a second of it where I felt, maybe this is a bit too much, or I want to go back into the present timeline. Instead, he does this non-linear narrative, where he stops, he goes back into the future, into the present timeline, and he comes back into the past. And every time it was in the present timeline, I just wanted to go back into the flashback with this one.
Mm-hmm. Rouven?
I actually have to, it's your opinion, Willem, but I'm actually coming from a different angle. I enjoyed the investigation, as I said, a bit more than I did the flashback. Not because I think that the acting was bad or something like that. That was all top notch here. But I think, as Panos just said, the way he inserts or implements these flashbacks, because as you said just a moment ago, the middle part is basically just one big flashback, and that's basically it. And that takes away a lot from the police investigation that you have here, the cop drama, which is about finding out the truth. And in comparison to his later works, we all know which works which I'm talking about. He does that, I think, more artistically, but also by, let's say, showing how past and present overlap to a certain extent. I like how they have, to a certain extent, shown how she unveils, the investigator, how she unveils the truths, and how it is a contrast to what the men in the present are saying, or basically not saying, because they don't say much about it, and how it shows different sides of the story. But I'm not such a big fan of the way it's implemented here.
Fair enough.
Okay, I tend to agree with Rouven a bit more. At least I think that I don't think there is something bad about particular about at least, but I feel that later on this part, the way he uses flashbacks got definitely better, and then you have Handmaiden, which is essentially the second part is a flashback on its whole, which to another level. Okay. The part about sorry, please.
I do agree that he did really polish the whole flashback effect in the later films. But I also, like I said, do believe that with this one, I don't think he did any missteps, at least in my opinion, with the flashback. I enjoyed every minute of it because it showed the playfulness and the relationship between the two sets of soldiers extremely well. And I think for the Korean audience, at least, this would be a part that could have been quite, I don't want to say emotional, but at least a bit more relatable maybe to see. I don't know.
Okay. Rouven, you want to say something?
I think for me, it's not so much the idea or how he does flashback, but how he challenges the viewer to watch closer to some extent. One of you just mentioned the last scene where you can see the photograph of these four soldiers, which if you look at it without the context of the film, it seems like, you know, it's just I'm not saying ordinary, but it looks like something you can believe that this is what happens at the border of North and South Korea. It looks very military. You have the clear distinction between the two soldiers, between the two systems, and there you have it. It's almost very tourist-like, but with the context of the film, you can actually see details, and I love that about Park Chan-wook's films, including JSA, that the more you watch them, the more details you get. And it's the same with that picture. I watched that for, let's say, the 5th time, and I'm still getting new things. For example, I noticed that one of the soldiers who was marching in the background was actually looking at the camera. I didn't notice that before, and he was somewhat smiling, I think. You know, these are details that you notice whenever you're rewatching a Park Chan-wook film, whether it is this one, Old Boy, Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance, and so on and so forth. I like this about him, that he, as I said, challenges or asks or demands, whatever you fancy, the viewer to look closer.
I think with this one, there's also the concept of the unreliable narrator that I think Park Chan-wook does really well with this one, because, you know, everybody who's telling their own story somewhere or the other, you can't really believe 100% as to what they're saying, and you have to you know, be really attentive as to where the story is going and what they're saying, to pick up these little things that Rouven just mentioned, you know, that could lead you to believe that you know, maybe they're not telling the truth. And as the story progresses, you actually find out that that is indeed the case.
Well, at this point, I also would like to mention a kind of a trivia about the film, that it was a hit in the box office, and the majority of people enjoyed it, but there was some people who did not like the film at all, and that was the army. They considered the film utterly unrealistic and based on events that could have never happened. And there was actually an incident on September 26 in 2000, where 20 old members of the JSA Union of Veterans stormed into the office of the production company of the film, broke windows, and threatened the employees. And they demanded that the company should offer apologies to the army and also include a note at the beginning and the end of the film that would state that the events occurring in the movie are purely fictional. And the company actually had to do that. It happened. I don't know if it's on the Blu-ray, but it was when it screened on cinemas. They had to apologize, which says a bit more about what the impact of this film in general.
Yeah, I read something along these lines about this film, where the biggest problem that the army had was not with the scenes of the soldiers going one way or the other, but it was more to do with the scenes where they show the soldiers sleeping or slacking off at their job. That was the biggest problem for them, and I thought it was. When I read it, I found it very, very funny, but I kind of see where they're coming from, because the South Koreans, they take their army very seriously and their job in the army extremely, extremely seriously. So, I do understand where they're coming from, but the whole angst against the film was kind of funny for me.
Mm-hmm. In general, army people are not famous for their sense of humor.
That's true.
They don't see things in that way. Okay. So one thing that definitely does not work for me with the film, which is actually a thing that it always happens in Asian, Korean, Japanese film, is the foreign actors in the film. Particularly the higher up of Sophie, which he is really bad in his acting. I don't know where they find these people, but it's very common that they have. It seems like they picked him like he was passing on the street at the time. They're looking for someone. They come here. You look like a colonel. So let's play in the movie. I don't know. What did you think about this part, Rouven?
Yeah, no, I'm not a fan personally either. I can count on my fingers the number of times foreign actors have acted in Korean productions or even Japanese productions, and they've actually done a good job of it. 9 times out of 10, it's just really, really cringeworthy to see them on camera going through their lines and just really overacting all this stuff.
Rouven?
I have to agree. That was the part where I laughed out loud. Not just the Swedish guy, but you remember the superior officer, the Swiss person with the pipe? Oh man, I felt like he would be right on the spot for a film like Inglourious Basterds with that accent. He is so funny, especially when he was stuffing his pipe. I was like, I mean, come on, how cliche can you get with a Swiss actor stuffing his pipe? I had the feeling that he was going to start yodeling at one point or something like that. I mean, he does a decent job with but I agree with rhythm in general with Asian productions. 9 out of 10 times when you see somebody who is foreign, who is German, who is British, or who is American, they are sort of very, very stiff, very awkward, almost as if they are following certain lines on the ground, like on the theater when you are sort of amateur and you need to know where you are and you need to know when you are at this point and you have to say line A, then you have to go to point B and you have to say B and stuff like that. Maybe I'm exaggerating, but that's how it looks like sometimes.
No, definitely. I don't think you're exaggerating at all. It looks extremely, particularly with this film, it looks very mechanical the way that the foreign
sorry, Rhythm, can you repeat? We didn't catch that. It's stuck for the video.
Yeah, I don't think Rouven was exaggerating at all. The foreign actors, particularly in this film, they were, they just seemed very mechanical going about their roles, and I wasn't a big fan of what they did here. I just wish that, they had gotten somebody else, somebody a bit more professional maybe to do that job instead of the ones that they did get.
And also I feel it was when the Korean actors speak English in the film, this is also the lowest point. They add on the English part, the non-Korean part in the film is pretty bad. I don't know. I'm not sure, okay, if they even knew how to speak English at the time, but it's definitely that they were not very good in acting in English.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
Even with the character of Sophie Jean, Lee Young-jae spoke good English, I think, but there's just the accent that was a bit too heavy for me, that I had to really concentrate as to what she was saying. The foreign actors, I think, maybe not so much for me, were a problem with their speech, but definitely Sophie Jean's character, I had to really pay close attention to what she was saying.
Rouven?
And I'm not sure if I get that wrong, but she is half South Korean, but she grew up in Switzerland, right?
Exactly it.
She doesn't sound Swiss at all.
Not at all.
I mean, either she went to Oxford and got rid of her accent completely, because that's what it sounds like, or I don't know. I mean, that's what it sounded like to me. It doesn't sound Swiss at all. Maybe she should have gotten a pipe as well. That would have gotten her some authenticity.
Yeah. Considering the quality of the accents there, they could also be participating in this dialogue here with us. That's the level of accent quality.
But I mean, to be fair, these are not the actors that you're concentrating on, right? Or the accent. I mean, you have acting heavyweights here. You've got Lee Byung-hun, who I think, I mean, whenever I see him, he's a fascinating performer to me. In this one particular, you like what I said with a Park Chan-wook cinema, that you are asked to look closer, and with his acting, there's so much going on in that face of his. You never know exactly what's going to happen. And the same for Kang-ho. I mean, these actors, whenever I see them, I'm not sure about you, they are fascinating to me. Even if the film or the material that they're working with is not on the same level as their acting, it is a fascinating, and I like having these two together in a scene. You can really see the talent of these two actors. I really, really like the scenes that these two have in that film, in JSA.
Really?
I think with JSA, today it's easy for us to say, the film has got acting heavyweights, as Rouven mentioned, and a director like Park Chan-wook. But what's really fascinating about this film is there weren't that much heavyweights when this film came out. Starting from the director, Park Chan-wook had made 2 films before this, which were both commercial and critical failures. Kang-ho had done, obviously he had done Shiri before it, where he had an important supporting role, but that's what it was essentially, a supporting role. Even in number 3, he was praised, but again, he was a supporting character. With Lee Byung-hun, he was an established actor, but again, he was not the superstar that we know him now to be, or he had not given the sort of performances that we now know him to be capable of. Or with Lee Young-jae, she was an established TV actor, but this was, I think, only her second film role. And all of them, even Shin Ah-kyu, who was practically a nobody at that point, and they are to have all of these in one film, and for them to actually break out, it was this film that caused them to be the big actors that we know them as now. So to look back at JSA with this historical context in terms of the actor and, in terms of the talent that it has both in front of and behind the camera is really unique and, quite interesting to see now.
I have to say, I think that in comparison, Song Kang-ho and the film I think it's much better than Lee Byung-hun. I think Lee Byung-hun became reached that level of, let's say, I don't know, for me, let's say the ultimate level in Korean acting is Song Kang-ho and Choi Min-sik, but I feel like Lee Byung-hun reached that high level much later, maybe in Masquerade or like some years later. And I don't, okay, his acting is good, but I really think that Song Kang-ho is, it's much better in this film. This is, obviously he was more experienced, but I think that his role is more complicated, more leveled, and he also does better by it than Lee Byung-hun does. I don't know, Rouven?
I think with Lee Byung-hun, what I like the most were the scenes where he's not speaking, and where he's not to say that when he speaks it's bad, but when you have that feeling when the camera shows him that there is this fight in him that's going on. You can see that he is trying his best to cover up whatever has happened at that point, but not so much in front of the investigator, but also for him. He's trying to make sense of what has happened. He's trying to come to terms with the fact that he has killed someone or took part in a murder, and he has given up this or destroyed this sort of friendship. And again, there's so much going on behind that face of his. I agree with you. If you compare it to, let's say, later roles, Bittersweet Life, or let's say I Saw the Devil, it is not on the same level. But in these sort of moments in Joint Security Area, you get the feeling that there is so much going on behind that face of his. And I don't know. I really, really, for personally, I like this actor a lot. I think when I saw A Bittersweet Life for the first time, that's when I sought out all the films with him, because he's really, really cool, and I like how he has developed over time.
Yeah. And also, I mentioned Masquerade because what you mentioned, Rouven, just now. It's the fact is that Lee Byung-hun did not speak very much in his movies until Masquerade. He doesn't speak too much in The Bittersweet Life or in The Good, the Bad, the Weird, or I Saw the Devil. He doesn't speak too much. I don't know. Okay, he's impressively looking. I mean, girls go crazy for Lee Byung-hun. So I think maybe sometimes the directors tend to rely on this aspect. But that is the reason I say that I feel Song Kang-ho's acting is better in general. Really?
Yeah, I think on some level I agree with the both of you. I do agree with Panos that Song Kang-ho definitely had the better performance here. Based on his experience, maybe, or I'm not really sure, but for sure his performance here was easily the best out of all of them. But having said that, I also wouldn't write off what Lee Byung-hun has achieved in this, because like what Rouven said, it's he has a very expressive face when he's not saying something, and he does tend to convey a lot with his facial expressions more than anything else. And with this, you can see the flashes of what he has yet to give in his future projects. Like you said, the whole broody sort of masculine heartthrob image that he has in stuff like JSA, or in A Bittersweet Life and The Good, the Bad, the Weird, which the directors really take advantage of in those. You can see the hints of that in this performance, and particularly in the latter half of the film, where the real reasons or the real incident that happened comes to light. I think that's where Lee Byung-hun really does the best of his work in this film. And so Masquerade came way later in 2008, 2011, 12 something. Yeah. Yeah. And so I wouldn't go far as saying that, you know, that's when Byung-hun, the actor, really evolved for me. You know, for me, it would be probably A Bittersweet Life, where I think was the first time that I really appreciated his performance more than anything else. And, you know, obviously then we had I Saw the Devil, where it wasn't just Choi Min-sik, in my opinion, who did a great job. It was Lee Byung-hun had you know, he was equal to Choi, if not better than him. So, you know, but definitely I agree that Masquerade is where I think he reached the pinnacle of his talent. And I still put that at, you know, the #1 alongside you know, his latest work in The Man Standing Next. But yeah, so I wouldn't say that Masquerade was where, for me, where he came in his own as an actor. But I do agree in terms of JSA, Song Kang-ho was definitely, you know, the more prominent of the performers here.
And maybe, okay, to end about the film, maybe to talk a bit about the production level. This was the first film to be shot in the country with a Super 35 camera, but also the impressive thing about the film is that they built the whole replica of the JSA and shot the film there, which is was pretty impressive for the time for a Korean production. And what I take out of this is, the highlight of this is definitely The Handmaiden, but Park Chan-wook, since the beginning of his career, knew what to do when he had a lot of money. And this is a trait for a director. A lot of them do not know what to do when they have a lot of money. And I feel that you can see this in the production level of the film. Rouven?
I agree with you. I think I think Park Chan-wook is a director who, if given a certain kind of budget, whether it's a minimal or a large budget, he knows what to do with it. If you think of this film where he, as you said, rebuilt the whole DMZ, or build it according to his vision.
I think what they did was they created a 90% replica of the JSA for this. Yeah, and I think you can, I'm not sure if you still can, but apparently it was a tourist site for a good while after the production ended.
Yeah.
And again, I think for a man who is, or for a director, or let's say even or even artist, because that's what I call him, who is obsessed with details, knows how to use details within the context of a story, whether it's JSA, when you have a small detail like a chocolate cookie who can mean so many things, who can stand for so many things, or let's say the line between two nations, which seems like a concrete block, but it's much more. Or let's say the whole kind of patterns that you can see, for example, in Old Boy, or the staircase in a film like Stoker, to just name a few examples. He knows what to do with them, and he knows how to use a budget wisely to create something that is truly unique and unforgettable.
Rhythm?
Yeah, I agree. He with the set particularly, what I read was something like 1/3 of the budget of the entire production went into recreating the set. You know, so the attention to detail that they must have had. Obviously, I haven't been to the original JSA. All I've seen is you know, pictures, but it does look very authentic to the original place of which I've seen pictures. And you know, I didn't know about the whole camera thing that you mentioned until very recently, actually. And that was another impressive aspect. And I think, you know, he, like Rouven said, is somebody who can make the most of, you know, the smallest of budgets or the most biggest of. I'm sure right now he's an actor, you know, who demands a massive budget, and the production companies are, you know, ready to just throw it at his feet. you know, but with JSA, I think what he has shown is that he is capable of making the most of this budget, and somebody that the production companies can, you know, maybe trust to see that, you know, their budget is not wasted or is used in the right places, either for details or for, you know, the technical betterment of the film.
Okay, I guess that's it. Rouven, you would like to add anything before we close? It's okay. You don't
no,
have.
That's it.
Okay.
I've said everything I wanted to say. And by the way, in case you're wondering, that was my fiance. You saw briefly in the picture.
Okay, it's a guest appearance. We're gonna have more in the future.
There was no North Korean agent or something like that.
Okay. Okay.
I would just like to ask both of you, you know, Park Chan-wook is somebody who we all love at Asian Movie Pulse, and you know, every single film of his is, you know, at least worth watching if you know, even if you don't enjoy it, or it's definitely something that you can see and enjoy in terms of you know, its technical abilities and whatnot. But in this exceptional filmography of his, where do you personally feel that JSA ranks? Even though, as much as I hate ranking people's films, I can myself never do lists and stuff like that. But where do you, for you guys personally, does JSA rank in his filmography?
You want to go first, Panos?
Okay, I guess I don't know if Old Boy is his best, because I've read and had so much for it. I now come to hate the film. I don't want to hear about it ever again. I understand its quality, but I don't care. I don't want to hear about it. So, okay, let's say that the three films in the trilogy, Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance, Old Boy, and Lady Vengeance, is right to the top. I guess then comes The Handmaiden, I'm a Cyborg, but that's okay, Thirst, and then comes JSA for me.
Wow.
Yeah. Rouven?
I'm not sure how many films he has done over time. At least I don't have it in my head, but I've seen the majority of them. And I gotta say, as Rhythm said, we're talking about a person. When we think of, let's say, put it in when we say I put this film in last place, which would for me be Stoker, that's something that has at least some redeeming qualities to it. It's not by no means a bad film, even though I think the reviews were horrible for that film when it came out, or at least they were sort of mixed for that. And for me, when I think of, when I compare it to the other features of his, I'd say it's in the last third, but we're talking about competing against not just Old Boy, but Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance and Sympathy for Lady Vengeance, which are the parts of the Revenge trilogy, which, even though I love Old Boy, which I think are stronger entries in that regard. And we're talking about competing against like Handmaiden, or something, or even something like I'm a Cyborg, but that's okay. I think these three films, I'm a Cyborg, but that's okay, Thirst and JSA would for me be somewhere in the middle, if at least, or in the last third of his films. But again, we're talking about a strong competition that they're having here.
And Yurin?
I agree that you know, it's really not right, or a bit unfair to the other films of his, because you know, we're talking about a really high bar, but also like Rouven said, probably it would be in the lower, if not the third, then at least the lower half of his filmography for me. I think personally for me, The Handmaiden is his right at the top for me, and I think then it would be the three Vengeance films, and I'm confused if I would rate Thirst or no, sorry, not Thirst. I'm a Cyborg or JSA after the Vengeance trilogy. But I think what the sort of differences that we've had with the whole list thing right now is it just goes to show how strong of a filmography Park Chan-wook has, where everybody's top one is maybe different and the whole sequence is different. And yet JSA is something that, is one of the best films to come out of the country. And even then we rate it so low in his filmography. So, I think that just speaks volumes for the kind of director that he is and the work that he puts out.
Yeah. I think for a director who had to deal with a topic that is a powder keg, to say the very least, and compared to, let's say, Shiri, who also dealt in some degree with this North and South Korea debate or topic, I think this JSA is among the film that I think handled it very intelligently and very smartly, at least in comparison.
Also, I read somewhere that one of the things that JSA had working for it was that it was released just 3 months or something after there was a summit between the North and the South. So that was something that people had been looking at it quite optimistically, even if it didn't ultimately work out in the end, as we now know. So that's, I think, a key element that worked in JSA's favor.
Okay, I guess that's it. The film is now available from Arrow. There is a new edition. If anyone wants to buy the film, you can find it now in the market. Yeah, Rouven has it. Exactly that. Okay, so this was ASEAN Vipal's talks number 11. In case you like these talks, you can subscribe to our channel. We have one of these every week. So from me, Panos, Rim, and Rouven.
Bye.
Probably see you next week. So long. Bye.
Bye.